a continent roughly the size of the United States, larger than the nations of Europe and yet almost completely uninhabited. Most people assume it's just a vast desert, but this is only part of the story. If history had played out differently, Australia could be home to 500 million people, reshaping the global balance of power. So what makes 95% of this landmass empty? And what if it isn't? The answer may change the way you see the world. Let's start. Australia is similar in size to the lower 48 US states, but has a much smaller population, just over 26 million compared to more than 300 million. California and Texas alone each have more people than the entire Australian continent. From a European perspective, England's population is more than double that of Australia. Globally, 7 smaller islands, including Great Britain, Honshu, Luzon, Mindanao, Java, Sumatra, and Madagascar, have larger populations. Java, despite being 6 times smaller than Australia, has nearly 6 times its population. Several cities worldwide also surpass Australia's population. The metropolitan areas of Tokyo, Jakarta, and Delhi all have more people, while Shanghai and Seoul are similar in size. Sao Paulo, Mexico City, New York City, Cairo, Lagos, Mumbai, and Moscow have comparable populations as well. So, if Australia is so big, why aren't people spreading out more? Why do nearly all Australians cling to the coast, leaving the interior almost untouched? The answer is a mix of geography, climate, and history. All things considered, Australia only has 5 major cities across its continent: Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, Perth, and Adelaide, which collectively house nearly 2 out of every 3 Australians. Australia is among the most urbanized nations in the world, with around 90% of the population concentrated in relatively small urban areas that make up just 0.22% of the country's total land area. Half of the population lives within these red areas, while the other half is mostly in these blue areas. Overall, about 85% of Australians live within 50 kilometers of the coastline, leaving the vast interior sparsely populated. This unique population distribution leads to some interesting geographical patterns across the continent. If you lived in Australia, would you choose the bustling city life near the coast or the peaceful but isolated outback? Why? But just how empty are we talking? Let's take a look at some mind-blowing examples of regions so vast, yet so sparsely populated, that they challenge our very idea of what a community is. For example, the Shire of East Pilbara in Western Australia. It is about the same size as Japan, but has just over 10,000 residents, with nearly half living in the town of Newman. Despite its vast land area, it functions more like a small town. Even more notably, there's the pastoral unincorporated area in South Australia. This dot represents Adelaide, Australia's 5th largest city, home to over 1.3 million people. Right next to this urban center is the pastoral unincorporated area, a region about the size of France, but with only 3,750 residents. Then there's Anna Creek, a vast area slightly larger than Israel. However, it is not a country or a governmental entity, but a privately owned cattle ranch, the largest in the world. According to Wikipedia, it is typically staffed by just 8 full-time employees, with fewer than a dozen people residing there at any time, alongside approximately 10,000 cattle. If these vast areas sound empty, just wait until you see the mind-boggling travel distances within Australia. Some routes take longer to drive than crossing entire continents. Australia is vast and sparsely populated. To illustrate, consider the towns of Esperance on the south coast and Kununurra near the north coast. Both are in Western Australia, yet driving between them takes at least 35 hours over a distance of more than 3,200 kilometers. Along the entire route, you would pass through communities with a combined population of fewer than 70,000 people. For comparison, this drive is similar in time and distance to traveling from Madrid to Istanbul across nearly all of Europe, where the population is significantly denser. So, why is Australia so empty? Many assume the answer is the desert, an arid landscape filled with extreme conditions and dangerous wildlife. While that plays a role, it's only a small part of the story. The real reasons behind Australia's low population are more complex than they might seem. So what's stopping people from settling in the interior? The desert is only part of the story. Australia's geography itself has set some nearly insurmountable challenges. Before exploring, I have a special 10-second request for all of you listening. If you can help me in any way, just hit the notification bell and hit that subscribe button. It helps this channel so much. And if you do that, I will do everything I can to make this show even better for you. Deal? Most of the challenges arise from the fact that Australia has unique geographic and climatic conditions. Located relatively close to Antarctica, the frozen continent, the western side of Australia experiences the effects of cold ocean currents moving up from the Southern Ocean. As a result, there is limited heat to generate the large-scale evaporation necessary for forming rain clouds over much of the west. Meanwhile, in the east, the Great Dividing Range is Australia's largest and longest mountain chain, and the fifth longest in the world. These mountains extend down the entire eastern side of the continent from north to south, and their elevation prevents many rain clouds advancing from the Pacific from moving further inland. This results in a rain shadow effect, where the vast interior of Australia receives limited moisture from the east. However, these mountains, when compared globally, are not particularly tall. Australia has the lowest average elevation of all Earth's continents, which contributes to its overall low rainfall. The tallest mountain on mainland Australia, Mount Kosciuszko, stands at 2,228 meters above sea level. For comparison, the highest points of every other inhabited continent are at least more than double that height. Nearly 34% of the U.S. state of Colorado alone has an elevation significantly higher than Mount Kosciuszko. As a result, Australia has very few tall mountains that can effectively force air upwards, where it can cool and condense into rain. Adding to this, the air in Australia is often too warm for rain to form because the continent straddles the Tropic of Capricorn. This places much of northern Australia within the tropics, while the rest lies in the subtropics. These regions are influenced by the subtropical high-pressure belt, which wraps around the globe and contributes to warming and drying the air. But it's not just about mountains and dry winds. Australia holds another extreme title, the driest inhabited continent on Earth, and this has profound effects on where people can live. Air that is pushed up by Australia's few tall mountains must also contend with unpredictable climate patterns, including the El Niño Southern Oscillation, which consists of El Niño and La Niña events. El Niño, which can last for years, weakens westerly winds over the Pacific, reducing moisture reaching Australia's eastern and northern regions. This often leads to intensified drought conditions. Many of Australia's most severe bushfires have coincided with these events. These factors make Australia the driest inhabited continent, with desert or semi-arid conditions covering approximately 36% of its land. Most of Australia's rainfall occurs along the east coast, Tasmania, and around Perth. Interestingly, northern Australia receives high annual rainfall. Darwin alone gets over 1,800 millimeters, nearly 3 times London's total. However, rain is highly seasonal, concentrated in the wet season from December to March due to monsoons and tropical cyclones. Rainfall in northern Australia's interior is extremely erratic. In 1898, a cyclone dropped 740 millimeters of rain on a small northern Australian town in a single day, exceeding London's annual average. However, in 1924, without cyclones bringing moisture inland, this same town received just 4 millimeters of rain throughout the entire year, less than the yearly average of the Sahara Desert. These extreme variations highlight the unpredictable nature of Australia's climate. If the climate wasn't enough of a challenge, here's another major roadblock: water. Even in regions that receive rain, finding and keeping fresh water is a struggle. Freshwater scarcity in Australia is not just due to erratic rainfall, but also the lack of large river systems. The most significant is the Murray-Darling Basin, located in the southeast, one of Australia's most populated regions. However, from a civilizational development perspective, it has limitations. The river system flows southwest and empties into the southern coast, but much of the basin lies beyond the Great Dividing Range, an area that receives limited rainfall. As a result, the Murray-Darling Basin's annual flow is approximately 24,000 gigaliters, the lowest among the world's major river systems. In comparison, the Mississippi River Basin in the United States has an annual flow of nearly 530,000 gigaliters, over 22 times greater. Despite this, the Murray-Darling Basin is vital to Australia's water supply and agriculture. It provides drinking water for approximately 3 million Australians and serves as the agricultural heartland, producing most of the food consumed by Australia's 26 million people, while also supporting exports across Asia. However, climate change is intensifying drought conditions, making water supply increasingly unreliable. 9 of the 10 hottest years in Australia's recorded history have occurred since 2005. Rising temperatures are accelerating evaporation rates in the basin, and with already limited rainfall, some sections of the river system remain completely dry for months at a time. But even if we solve the water issue, there's still another challenge, one hidden beneath our feet. Australia's soil is among the oldest and least fertile in the world. Why? The answer goes back hundreds of millions of years. Sustaining a large population in Australia is challenging not just due to fresh water scarcity, but also because of limited arable land. This is largely due to geography, geology, and location. In northern Australia, there's been no significant mountain building since the Precambrian era, which ended 1,200 million years ago. Additionally, no glacial activity has occurred here since the Carboniferous period, nearly 300 million years ago. As a result, soils in this region have been continuously weathered and eroded for over 250 million years, far longer than the less than 10,000 years seen in much of North America, Europe, or Asia. Consequently, most of northern Australia has poor soil quality for agriculture. One exception is the Lake Eyre Basin, but even this area receives low rainfall, limiting irrigation potential. However, these geographic and climatic factors alone do not fully explain Australia's population limitations. Despite these challenges, Australia possesses significant freshwater resources when compared to countries rather than continents. Australia has an estimated 492 cubic kilometers of renewable freshwater resources, exceeding that of many more densely populated nations. For instance, this is twice as much as Pakistan, a country with over 8 times Australia's population. Thus, freshwater scarcity is not the sole factor limiting population growth, nor is a lack of arable land. While only about 6% of Australia's land is considered arable and suitable for agriculture, the country's large landmass means that this still accounts for a significant amount of farmland. Australia has more arable land than Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, the Philippines, Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos combined, despite those nations having a combined population of 542 million people, compared to Australia's 26 million. Furthermore, Australia has the highest ratio of arable land to population in the world, with approximately 1.9 hectares per person. By comparison, the United States has only 0.47 hectares per person. If Australia's population density matched that of the United States, the country could theoretically support over 90 million people, far below the U.S. population, but significantly higher than today's Australian population. If you're fascinated by geography, history, and hidden truths about our world, make sure to hit that like button. It helps more curious minds like yours discover this content. Despite all these challenges, Australia could still have supported more people if it weren't for one major factor: isolation. The continent has been cut off from the rest of the world for tens of thousands of years, shaping both its wildlife and its population. Australia has the space and resources to support more than its 26 million people, but its isolation has historically made migration difficult. For millions of years, the continent remained separated from other major landmasses, leading to unique evolution, where marsupials dominate rather than placental mammals. Humans first arrived around 50,000 years ago, when lower sea levels allowed migration through the Sunda Peninsula and New Guinea, which was then connected to Australia by a land bridge called Saul. As sea levels rose after the last ice age, the bridge disappeared about 10,000 years ago, making Australia even more remote. For nearly 10,000 years, before European contact in the 17th century, outside influence was minimal. Two known interactions occurred. Dingoes, likely introduced from New Guinea around 8,300 years ago, and genetic evidence suggesting contact with South Asian groups about 4,000 years ago. In fact, despite its size, Australia was one of the last major land masses to be settled by Europeans, and when they did arrive, they were in for a shock. In 1606, a Dutch explorer landed on Cape York Peninsula, marking Australia's first recorded European contact. However, the Dutch never settled due to the continent's harsh conditions. The closest they came to a settlement was accidental. In 1656, the Dutch ship Driest wrecked off Western Australia. 75 survivors reached shore, and 7 sailed 1,400 kilometers to Jakarta for help. Despite multiple rescue missions, the remaining 68 survivors were never found, their fate unknown. More than 3 centuries later, in 1963, Australian divers discovered the wreck north of Perth. Meanwhile, the British established Australia's first permanent European settlement in 1788 on the opposite coast near Sydney. At that time, Australia's population was about 650,000, far smaller than other continents. In 1788, Asia had 650 million, Europe had 150 million, Africa had 85 million, and the Americas had 20 million. With such a low starting population, Australia lagged in growth. In 1788, the United States had 4 million people. Australia did not surpass that number until 1906, over a century later. Even after European settlement, Australia struggled to attract immigrants. But why? Other countries were booming, so what held Australia back? By 1906, America's population was nearing 90 million. For most of Australia's history, emigration primarily came from the British Isles. The discovery of gold in 1851 triggered a massive gold rush, with around 2% of the British Isles population migrating to Australia in the 1850s, more than doubling its population in a short time. However, Australia struggled to attract European immigrants afterward, as it competed with closer and more accessible destinations like the United States, Canada, Brazil, and Argentina. Immigration also declined due to the White Australia policy, enacted in 1901, which restricted immigration to people of white European ancestry, favoring British migrants. As a result, Australia's immigration remained low in the early 20th century, while millions moved to the United States. During World War I, Australia's population declined, as nearly 1 in 5 men were sent to fight in Europe. Tragically, about 2.5% of Australia's male population did not return. Then, everything changed. A world war, a looming invasion threat, and a desperate need for more people led to one of the biggest shifts in Australia. By World War II, Australia had 7 million people, mostly of European descent, and feared being outnumbered by neighboring Asian nations. In 1942, Japan, with over 73 million people, bombed Darwin, heightening invasion concerns. Although an invasion never occurred, the government sought to increase immigration to strengthen the population. Before 1945, most immigrants came from Britain and Ireland, but after the war, Australia expanded immigration to include mainland Europeans. By the 1960s, 3 million Europeans, including war refugees, had settled in Australia. However, non-European immigration remained limited until the White Australia policy was abolished in 1973. Since then, Australia has embraced multiculturalism, welcoming immigrants from around the world. In the 21st century, most newcomers arrive from China, India, and other Asian countries. The country now caps immigration at under 200,000 people per year, a high rate for a nation of 26 million. As of 2022, 1 in 3 Australians was born overseas, the highest proportion among developed Western nations. 95% of Australia is empty, but this channel is full of incredible content. Hit subscribe and ring the bell to explore more of the world's most surprising places. So where does that leave Australia today? Despite all these challenges, the country continues to grow and change. But what will its future look like? Australia is a diverse nation shaped by immigration, and by 2050 its population is projected to reach around 36 million, similar to Canada's population today, mainly due to continued immigration. However, this growth will come with challenges. Australia's environmental conditions, including unpredictable rainfall, drying rivers, droughts, and vast arid landscapes, combined with the evolving impact of climate change, will pose significant obstacles as the country navigates its future population expansion. If you found today's video interesting, don't hesitate to hit the like button and subscribe to my channel. Your support is very important to us. Be sure to check out the next video appearing on your screen. You're sure to love the content we bring. Please leave a comment about which country you'd like us to explore next. Thank you for watching, and see you in the latest video. Thanks for being with us. Leave a comment, like to show your support, and remember to hit that subscribe button for more exciting videos. See you next time.